Reb David Raskin was the Menahel of Tomchei Temimim 770 Lubavitch Yeshiva after the passing of Rabbi Yoel Kahn the Rashag in 1989. He took over for his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, when the Frierdiker Rebbe became the Rebbe in 1920. So his son-in-law, his older son-in-law, the Rashag, became the Menahel Poel, the acting principal of Tomchei Temimim. When he passed away in 1989, Reb David Raskin became the Menahel Poel. But in addition to that, this year, Reb David Raskin had his hands in every single thing in 770 and Lubavitch, mitam of the Rebbe, meaning from the Rebbe appointed him to so many different leadership positions. And why? I knew this person. Why? Because he was a Baal Meretz, he was energetic, and he got things done. And true, he was a Russian, Chassid, very Hasidic. Rabbi Yoel Kahn, who was a contemporary of his, at his shloshim, which I attended, summed it up best. Rabbi Yoel said, they asked him to speak, so he says he had a shir that night, that he has to go to the shir, but he has just one thing to say, that Reb David Raskin, he said, was a student of Reb Nissen Nemenov. Everyone knows Reb Nissen Nemenov was into avodas atfila davening with great kavanah, davening for many hours, and his skafia, and subjugating Yetzer Hara, especially from eating much and all that. Which in Chabad today they call that the Doir Hashishi, the sixth generation, the Frierdiker Rebbe's generation, avodah. The Rebbe, the Doir HaShvi's generation, the avodah is Hafotza Mayonos Chutza, outreach, Mivtzoyim, etc. So Rabbi Yoel said that although Reb David was a Talmud, a student, a Talmud Pnimi, a Makabel Pnimi, a real, I don't know if he used those words, Makabel Pnimi, I don't recall if Rabbi Yoel used those words, but the idea he meant that he received in the inner makings of Reb Nissen. He lived out what Reb Nissen wanted in his avodas atfila and his skafia and his everything else. Nevertheless, when the Rebbe became Rebbe and he became the Rebbe's chassid, he went along with the Rebbe's approach. Not that he gave up davening and his skafia, but his emphasis was hafotza. So he was appointed by the Rebbe to head Tzach, Tzidak Gudus Chabad, I believe in 1955, the Lubavitch youth organization, which consisted of sending Bacharim to shuls to speak Chasidism between Mincha, Ma'ariv, and Shabbos. It consisted of giving out menorahs and Mishleach Monish packages on Purim, and Matzah on Pesach, Shmura Matzah. All the things that are a norm today started then, and who headed it? Reb David Raskin. He was also in, as I said, the Menahel in 770. He would come in to the Beis Medrash, the upstairs Zal, we call it, the small Beis Medrash. This was when I was a bacher getting the Yeshiva, like in 1982 or 3 or so. And I became a chassan, so between the engagement and the chasana, which is like the best of the best time, Yokar Mikol Yokar, I went over to him. He was standing, I remember, at the Bima, upstairs in 770, and he's standing there, and I don't know if he was marking attendance, I don't recall what he was doing. And I say, Reb David, I say in Yiddish, he spoke Yiddish. He didn't really speak English. I think he understood English, but he didn't really speak it or speak it much, or definitely a very broken English. So I say, Reb David, maybe, maybe you could tell me what's the recipe for a good marriage. So he looks at me and he thinks and he says, if your wife will make you some food, once it's too gesalzen and it's too salty, sag gar nicht. Don't say anything. He laughed with a twinkle in his eye, and that was it. the best marriage advice he could have given, he gave. Why? Put yourself aside. It's your wife. She made your food. Be so thankful. It doesn't taste so good. It's too salty. Excuse me. Shut your mouth. Be quiet. And understand. Thank her for making it. You didn't make it. That was in line with his whole avodah of iskafia, that. Don't put an emphasis on the food. It sounds like a little silly little story, that personal thing that, but it tells you a lot about the person. I recall he was also in charge of what was called talucha, or as he would say it, ta'awucha. Some Russians can't say the wamed, they say wamed. Ta'awucha. Ta'awucha means to go, to walk, from the word leilech. To go. To go where? To walk to shuls and give over Chasidis, which Chabad-Lubavitcher does during the Yom Tovim, the 3 Yom Tovim, and other times. And the Rebbe would speak about it when the next day at the farbrengens and ask everyone who wanted talucha to say l'chaim. The Rebbe really, really supported the talucha. And talucha started, I think, even during the Frierdiker Rebbe's times, I think in 1945 or so. Anyway, it started either in the 40s or 50s. And Reb David was in charge of it. And when he would speak about talucha, and he would farbreng once a year, Shvir Shel Pesach night. That was the only time I remember him farbrenging, and it was a farbrengen to be seen. He took Mashpia, and he would start talking about, he would be sarcastic. His sarcasm about eating and drinking and pizza and soda, and many of the people who already balabatim, their children, they would come to that farbrengen because they remembered the farbrengen from their youth when they were bacherim, that it made them laugh and it felt good. So Shvir Shel Pesach was a farbrengen that was to the once a year farbrengen with Reb David Raskin. And he would talk about talucha, and he would say, what is your whole avodah worth if you don't go on talucha? Talucha. So what Rabbi Yoel said about him was exactly true. Talucha. How can you compare just walking to sitting and learning and davening and being mizbeinen and meditating on tefillah and Chasidis? Talucha. Getting your feet to move, because the Rebbe wants you to go share Chasidis in other shuls for other Yidden, is more important than your own davening and learning. Finally, this Yid was a Bal Yisurim. He didn't have it easy in his physical, material life. And regardless, you never heard from him a complaint. You never. And one last thing I remind myself. I worked for the Yeshiva years ago for 770. And Reb David was the one who had to sign off. He had to sign the contract. The Rebbe wanted a contract between an employer and employee, including in the yeshiva system. So he was summoned by Rabbi Meir Kukowski to come to his office with me, and we'll sign the contract. The pen was in his hand like this, and he wouldn't put it down and sign. And Rabbi Kukowski says, Reb David, Metafes Chasamin, we have to sign it. And he would just look and think, and he wouldn't sign. Finally, after a long time, he signed it. He didn't explain, but I think communism and the Russian mentality of putting pen to paper and committing to something, and the fear of that was still ingrained in his DNA. But it was a scene to be seen. Here I am. Everyone's agreed that I should work for them. They need me. They want me. I want to work for them to help the yeshiva. Okay. We have an agreement. We spoke about it orally. Sign it. He's holding the pen, looking and thinking. So this was a very interesting Yid, a Yid who was Kol Kuli Rebbe. His kashrus. Oh, Reb David's his kashrus. Reb Moshe Kotlarski of Shalom, just passed away, would tell over the story that he learned in Bedford and Dean, and Reb David was a Mashpia there in the 1950s, as well as Rabbi Yoel. And once they took a ride from Bedford and Dean, which is in Bedford-Stuyvesant, to Crown Heights, where Rabbi Kotlarski's parents lived, and he was a boy, probably 11, 12, 13, a young boy. And they went together. So David asks him, "Where are you going?" So he says, "I'm going home." So he tells the taxi driver to pull up at 770, and he says, "Here is your home. Get off." And he says to them, "David, what do you mean this is not my house? I live wherever I live." You have to know that your home is 770. Your David was iskashrus, full-fledged iskashrus, just like his brother Reb Leibel Raskin was iskashrus. I spoke about that in an earlier clip. Reb David was also his kashrus, connection to Rebbe. No, b'schus all of the things that he did for the Rebbe, for Lubavitch, may his family, his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, all have only simchas. Everyone should go under the chuppah in a good way, in a happy way, and have gesund and happiness, and taka live out the hiskashrus that Reb David had to the Rebbe and to the Eibishter and to Chasidism in a way that's real, that's practical, and that will bring him back together with the Rebbe, v'kitzur an sheikh ne'ofer, b'hu b'teicham, amen ve'amen, Mashiach now.